This evening, our speakers will be Joe and Sandy Tyndale-Biscoe, and the title of their talk is Villa Frere, a Lost Malta Garden Revived. Both Sandy and Joe are equally involved with its history. Joe's connection is via her maternal grandmother, Dolores Price, who was born in Villa Frere in 1891. Her husband, Sandy, his link is from his 4 times grandfather, William Frere, who is the brother of John Hookham Frere, who lived there in the 1830s.
Wow.
The slides this evening will detail the most recent discoveries and renovations of this remarkable and exciting project. Due to the lockdown, unfortunately, Joe and Sandy have been unable to visit Malta recently, but they've kept up to date closely with what's going on. Their team includes Edward Said and Fernando Mifsud, but they've also got other enthusiastic helpers. So that's what is happening. But just before we start, can I please say to you that if you mute your microphones and turn off video, if you're having poor reception, that will improve it. Of course, you unmute yourself when you want to ask a question or anything else. The talk this evening will last about 45 minutes. Following the talk, there will be an opportunity for questions, but please hold your questions until the end. No questions during the talk. Either use the chat button or type your question or hold up your hand. Now, this talk this evening is going to be recorded and possibly uploaded to our website. Your attendance, therefore, will be taken to be consent to be potentially included in the recordings. So without further ado, I'd like to pass over to Joe and Sandy and invite them to give us their talk. Joe and Sandy.
Thank you very much. Good evening. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Evening.
Good evening.
Since we can't go to Malta at the moment, Sandy and I are here to tell you of the restoration project at Villa Frere Gardens in Pietà. We'll start our talk in the same way as you would with an actual tour, with this colourful sign. It was made for the gardens by the famous pottery at Villa Bologna a few years ago. It now welcomes visitors to this very amazing place. We'll start our talk. If you've never heard of Villa Frere Gardens, then we must give you a very short history. Villa Frere is just outside Valletta in Pietà by Masida Creek, and the gardens are the focus of a great restoration and protection plan. Several times danger has loomed with developers wanting to build 9-story apartment blocks and hotels on the adjoining land. It will completely overpower these historic gardens. And so far, this has been fought off, but the risk is still there. And we've been involved in it right from the start in 2009. And here is himself, John Hookham Frere, who created the gardens in the 1830s. He was a learned scholar, poet, academic, politician, diplomat, and head of the Frere family from Norfolk in England. In 1821, he left England with his wife Elizabeth after his long political career. He brought with him his love of the classics and the arts, as well as his creativity in many areas, including poetry, medicine, and archaeology. He had enough money to give generously to the poor and needy, and was well known for this during his life in Malta. His Irish wife, the very lovely Elizabeth, Countess of Errol, was a famous beauty. She was the widow of George Hay, 16th Earl of Errol. And after he died in tragic circumstances, she'd become very ill. And later, when she married Frere, he'd been advised on health grounds, they had been advised on health grounds, to live in a warm climate. So they came to the Mediterranean, eventually settled in Malta in 1821. They lived in Valletta to begin with, and later moved to the house in Pietà, which is now known as Villa Frere. And this photo shows the villa in the centre, painted white, as it was many years later in 1909. Sadly, Elizabeth Frere died in 1831. And to distract himself in his grief, Frere devoted himself to developing a pleasure garden on the bare hillside behind the villa. This hill is Guardamangia, now famous as the location of the home of Princess Elizabeth and the late Duke of Edinburgh, when he was a humble lieutenant commander serving in Malta. Frere gave employment to many local workmen and created a wonderful terraced garden with complex water systems, with wells and water tanks. And with his knowledge of the classics, he built temples and gazebos in the style of ancient civilizations that had been his interest for so long. He was a man of learning and knowledge and all things classical, as a true gentleman of his era. He created this unique space in which to entertain his many literary visitors. And this really early photograph was taken by Reverend Calvert Jones, who was a friend of the inventor of photography, Fox Talbot, dated spring 1846, just after Frere's death. Shows the temple and the wall at the top of the garden with all the balustrades complete. Remarkably, these features are still standing. Frere brought his English love of gardens to Malta. These sort of features are very rare in Malta, which makes this garden so important to rescue. Frere's name is still much respected in Malta for many reasons, but he and his wife had helped so many Maltese during times of terrible unemployment in the 1830s. He has a street named after him near to the villa, and a primary school next door was known as Hookham Frere School until quite recently. The name's now changed to a more Maltese connection, reflecting a more independent Malta. His home in the 1830s was a haven for visiting writers, poets, and scholars. He befriended, amongst others, the impoverished writer Michel Anton Vassalli, who'd written down the first dictionary and grammar of the Maltese language. And through his publishing connections in England, Frere enabled this to be printed for him. And this picture shows the graves of both Frere in the background, behind the railings, and his friend Vassalli, close to each other in the restored Mesida Bastion Cemetery. This is well worth a visit. Lovely views over the harbour and across to Villa Frere on Mesida Creek. Vassalli, who trained as a Catholic priest, is buried here rather than in the Catholic cemetery because he committed the heinous crime of marrying, and Frere supported him. So what sort of garden did Frere design? Well, recently I had the privilege of looking through the Frere family archive, where I discovered a handwritten map showing Frere's plans of the gardens, showing quite clearly the temple and many steps and terraces. It was possibly part of a letter home showing what he was up to. His brother William had just returned to England after a visit to Malta, having failed to persuade Frere to come back home after his wife's death and take up his role as head of the family. Well, the garden extended then to about 3.5 acres. All sorts of details are written carefully down in Frere's handwriting on this map. The architect of the garden's unknown, but finding the map fills in the gaps in our knowledge. So after Frere's death in 1846, his gardens became rather neglected, although the villa was rented out occasionally. This drawing shows how it looked in 1848, when the Dalhousie family lived there briefly. We were lucky enough to have been lent a book of prints showing this family's photos and drawings. And this lovely drawing shows the balustrade round an interesting geological feature that Frere exposed. It was a 60-foot deep pit discovered when he was building the garden, and excavating ground for his terraces. He even opened the gardens for the public to view down into the hole, because in its day it had been of great interest. Various names have been given to it by the families living there, such as the Lion's Pit or the Dreadful Awful Hole. Well, no one knew exactly what it was, and that is still the case today. This cavity is at present covered up underneath a tarmac car park right beside the temple. One day the project may reach a point where this area could be reunited with the rest of the garden. We're very hopeful this might happen, especially as there's a suspicious dip in the ground exactly over the hole. So perhaps with safety in mind, the car park should be deemed unsafe. Who knows? Today, only a third of the original garden is accessible, the rest having been built over by the primary school and the former St. Luke's Hospital and its helipad. This map gives you an idea of the garden in the days of Frere. The large lower part shaded in the map has been built over, but luckily the main cultivated part of the garden still exists. So starting at the top, I think Sandy's going to point out the water side, we have the villa, and then with a lower garden behind it, and along to Villa Hay, and the garden of birds next door, and the farmhouse, and up the steps to the royal gazebo, and the pit, he can point out, and then the temple at the summit of the hill. And these ornate stone-carved wellheads were a wonderful feature of the original gardens. And the wells and cisterns were essential for storing water. There were about 13 wells that we can see from the maps, not all having such elaborate decorations. Here in this 1859 photo from the Dalhousie collection, the stone is still in a really good state, before the climate of Malta eroded the soft stone. Enormous water cisterns have been discovered in at least 3 places in the garden. But what was the source of water back then? There's no detail showing whether the rainwater alone was the source, or whether there was a stream flowing then, now dried up, or just water runoff from the upper terraces. There are gullies lower down in the garden, but the best guess by those who know is the storage of winter rains in the large underground cisterns. And now we come to the next era of Villa Frere, with the acquisition by the Messina family in 1876. Then in 1886, naval officer Edward Price married one of their daughters, Josephina, shown here posing on the temple steps. Maybe this was specially posed to celebrate their engagement. We don't know. You can see the stone lions at the bottom of the stairway, and one of these has been rediscovered amongst the rubble and can be seen in the visitor centre. They lived here with their 4 children, one of whom was my grandmother Dolores, and it's because of her that I've become fascinated with the gardens. And this photo shows the classical temple in all its glory at the top of the gardens. You can see Commander Price on the stairway, much of which still exists today, although not in good condition, but recognizable. In his time, Commander Price restored the garden to make it a very beautiful place, visited by many of the great and the good over a period of 40 years. He added many features, including an authentic Japanese garden, which sadly no longer exists, as the primary school was built on top of it. However, the tunnel into it has now been cleared and a cherry tree planted to replace an original one that had died. The school children are keen to learn about Frere and the history of the gardens, and there's a good relationship between all concerned, and the children often come into the gardens to visit. Commander Price made his own mark on the gardens, as owners do, and the old photos from my grandmother give us a clue as to the planting and general atmosphere of the place. He created a funny gnome garden, which may surprise you, but in those days they were a fashionable addition to a garden, having been made popular in Germany in 1845. These individual gardens that Edward Price created have been copied in a modern way by the imaginative work today, and there is a cactus and a gnome garden in miniature now planted. And there's shady nooks and steps with colourful potted plants are everywhere, just as they were in Frere's day. In 1930, the beauty of the gardens was also recorded in an article by Country Life, with many lovely photographs to show exactly what it was like. This is a colorized photo from the Country Life pictures, but making it look exactly as if it was taken today. After the death of Josephina Price in 1939, the government took back the property. Following the years of the Second World War, when Malta was so heavily bombed and the gardens suffered great neglect, the next occupation was to come with the Spiteri family, who came to the villa in 1951. Now, Sandy's going to take you through the restoration that has taken place over the last 10 years.
Well, over the years, the villa has dilapidated seriously. Most of the garden was sadly left to decay. Much of the upper terraces were bulldozed to make way for extensions to St. Luke's Hospital, for the primary school, and the ultimate insult, the helipad that now sits beside the upper temple. Well, this photo was taken by Michael Mackenzie in the mid-1990s. He is writing a biography of William Frere, his wife's, and as it happens, my great-great-great-grandfather and the brother of John Hookham. Now, our story actually begins in 2001. We were on holiday in Malta and on a whim decided to try and find Joe's grandmother's birth house. What followed was a series of chance encounters. When looking for the house, we met a lady who had been a student of English at the university, and he put us in touch with her professor. This was Professor Peter Vassallo, present this evening. Hello, Peter. Who is a champion of the writings and the life of Frere. He is also, as it happens, the uncle of the current host to this Zoom meeting. Small world, eh? Inspired by this, in 2009, Jo wrote a book about the villa, based mainly on the photographs from her family, and Peter Vassallo invited her to give a talk about it to the National Trust of Malta, Dinlart Helwa. We met Edward Side, and he was to prove to be the star of the garden's revival plan. He's a revival architect, restoration architect, with a special interest in garden history. And when he came to Bath University to do a master's degree in garden restoration, he took Villa Frere as his subject. So much of the professional research was done by him. Together with Joe's family connection and his dedicated work, the project began to take shape. This is the garden, if you can call it that we started to restore about 10 years ago. In the beginning, we had little idea of the extent of the structure of the garden, as all that could be seen was an overgrown, derelict hillside. We had photographs from Joe's grandmother that she had rescued from the bonfire when her mother was clearing her grandmother's house. The classical temple at the top had been a source of intrigue for the Maltese people for many years, as everyone knows of its position, hidden away behind the hospital. Friends meet there, cats are fed there, and there is an atmosphere of romance, even though it's a bit of a ruin. And it all adds to the mystery and attraction of the gardens. Following Edward Side's acquisition of keys to access the garden, work on restoration began. Having no access to the villa down at the waterside, we started at the top beside the school and worked down. This upper terrace was, sorry about getting a compliment from the lurcher to my left, but never mind. This upper terrace was the beginning of the story and was the only part of the gardens that was not completely overgrown. After several skips had taken years of rubbish away, and water and electricity established, access became possible. A simple building, formerly used as the hospital's caretaker shelter, was renovated and made into a visitor centre and is the main way in now. We would visit Malta every year, helping with the restoration and bringing friends out to help. At the beginning, help was limited to trusted people, as Edward was aware of what damage could be done by careless work. The garden terraces were unrecognisable, and there was rubble and ruin everywhere. It was a daunting task, but we never gave up hope. Here is our good friend Henry Buchanan. Hi, Henry. Working on what we later came to call Henry's Wall, at the time totally open. Take him out. At the time, totally overgrown with magnolia, but once it looked like this. In 1920s, this lovely painting was done by visiting artist Nicholas Krasnov of the flowers of the wall between below what is known as the Tower of the Four Winds. Now you can see this feature all around the island, actually. It is not part of the garden. Some Maltese like to think that Lady Hamilton used to use this tower to raise a flag to indicate to Nelson that he was available. But actually we know that Lady Hamilton never visited Malta. This glimpse of the past encourages us all nowadays to recreate it again and keeps the romance of the place alive. Here's another example of what we faced. My lady wife hacking through the undergrowth to reveal this lovely little set of steps. The excitement of finding them in early days, not knowing the plan of the garden, it was and still is all slow and careful archaeology. The wellhead behind us has only recently been put back in place. The original work party was only Edward's side, a few friends of his, ourselves on a yearly or twice yearly visit, and in addition, Peter Borgigu, who had been a pupil at the primary school and was keen to restore the gardens. Peter was a recorder, and he was seconded by the government to work in the garden as curator. His efforts were an essential part in those early times. Due to ill health, he is no longer directly involved, but he recorded and saved artifacts that were found in the digging, and they are displayed in the visitor centre. In this cabinet, you can take it away. God, sorry about that. Captain Barnacle's in full voice. The trouble is, for those who don't know, there is actually a samba band practicing just up the hill, and he wants to join in, but a little bit of added informality. Anyway, in this cabinet, you can see the original Villa Frere nameplate, which would have been on the front door beside the doorbell, and various other bits of decoration and plaques and so forth that have been found as part of the digging up. In 2013, the non-government organisation Friends of Villa Frere was born. There were no funds available as yet, but slowly support grew and the results are now very visible. With a Facebook page and local support from friends, the gardens host open days and art society workshops and even magazine shoots. It all helped to advertise the project and give it support. But the work, managerial and physical, was hard. The main steps down were lost beneath years of compost, roots, wild plumbago, acanthus and bignonia. Edward insisted that as we excavated, all soil and rubble were separated and then taken up to the top where we knew what we were working with. One of the few structures that was still visible amongst all the undergrowth in the garden, apart from the large temple at the top, was this little tempietto, which we named the Royal Gazebo because we know that plaques were placed there in the Price's time, commemorating visits by Queen Mary, who came on her way back from the Delhi Durbar in 1912, and by Queen Marie of Romania. The plaques are lost now, but you can see where they were. And this is my wife, clearly telling me to forget the photography and get back to work. As you can see, the building was nearly falling down and therefore dangerous to visitors, and Edward made it his priority to save it. Without the classical features of the garden, the character of the place would not have any impact and therefore not attract support, especially financial support. So it is vital to keep the integrity of the garden. And here is what this looks like today. Safe, restored, and beginning to look like something that Frere, and indeed Edward Price, would have been proud of. But this was a difficult time for the project, as it was seriously needing more help, both financial and physical. And by 2017, Edward was on the verge of abandoning the project altogether due to the pressure of his own architectural practice and other restoration projects he was involved with. Then, on the very day that he decided to return the keys of the garden, he got a message from one Fernando Mutsud, a horticultural expert who wanted to help with the project. Fernando then joined the team in the role of head gardener, and he has revitalized the planting. He brought with him his father, who is retired from business and who has taken on the role of master stonemason. Fernando, who has his own extensive garden up near the Victoria lines, somehow manages to find time to visit Villa Frere garden on most days. The plants are now in the hands of a professional. They are watered and fed and cared for. The combination of the horticultural and the architectural aspects of the project are now on the path to success. Fernando's knowledge of planting is an inspiration, and he often invites visitors to share in any job, such as by giving them the pleasure of ceremoniously planting a new tree, which makes people feel part of the project. Here, Jo and a cousin of hers happily planting tamarisk tree in 2019. Henry's Wall and the Tower of the Four Winds are in the background. The place is now more like a garden than a ruin. And these are the main men, standing in front of a high wall that they have just rebuilt. Edward's side on the left, Fernando Misford on the right, with George, his father, in the centre. George has become enthusiastically involved, and there is nothing he can't mend, build, or create in stone or wood. Together, they make an amazing team, along with all the other loyal supporters. With the influence of Edward and his connections in Malta, and confidence in the work that has been achieved, the Ministry of the Environment has returned several carved stone wellheads and stone benches that had been held for safekeeping after the war up at Casaleone in Rabat. Now, this old stone bench is once again back in its rightful place, with a sea view as it always was in Frere's day. Following a generous donation, the balustrades have been rebuilt around the viewing platform. And furthermore, the floor has been restored with defun. This is a Maltese flooring technique traditionally carried out by Maltese ladies, consisting of a mixture of crushed pottery, dust, and limestone, plus a secret personal ingredients, which I may be persuaded to explain later. It will never be possible to completely restore the gardens, but it is now what Fernando calls a contained ruin. It still manages to feel like a private garden and gives joy to all who visit it. In 2018, the President of Malta, Her Excellency Marie-Louise Colliero Precca, came to unveil a stone plaque in the restored Royal Gazebo to commemorate this important step. Here she is unveiling the plaque. And it really felt the efforts of the past eight years had finally been officially recognized. Then in 2019, the Heritage Malta organization felt able to commit themselves to the restoration project, which was a huge milestone. With the future of the gardens a little more secure, Edward felt the way forward could be possible. Progress is slow but sure, and it is now possible to walk right round the gardens and appreciate some of their former glory in safety. So now I'll hand you back to Jo, who will take you on a virtual tour of the garden, just as one might experience it on the first Sunday of every month.
So here is what you see as you enter the visitor centre, which is tucked away at the far end of St Luke's Hospital. We'll start the tour at the top of the garden, where there's a large flat-top terrace, which is very good for entertaining visitors. The area is cool and shady under the old oak and olive trees. The pathways here were amongst the first to be excavated and restored. Just to remind you, this is what we started with 9 years ago. And this is what it looks like today. Going down the main terrace steps, which are now cleared and planted with bulbs and shrubs, there are benches to relax on, generally a recognizable garden to enjoy. At the bottom of those steps, you forget you're in a crowded city, although you can obviously hear the traffic in the distance. And there's always a dog barking and sirens wailing, but you can eventually get used to these two worlds living beside each other. The classical urns are full of flowers and the pathways are cleared. You can make a proper tour of the gardens. Well, then we come down to the octagonal pond, which has now been mended and water returned to bubble in the fountain again. Just to show you what it looked like when Country Life photographed it in 1930, showing us a really classical feature. Note the fir tree, now the only large plant still alive from the time of the garden's heyday, although it's sadly fallen over. And here's Edward Side administering first aid to it. The original mosaic stones were very badly jumbled, as you can see here, and Edward spent many happy hours fitting the jigsaw puzzle together. Bees and hornets love this area, I suppose because of the water. Unfortunately, so do the mosquitoes love this little pond, so that's mixed blessings. Acanthus plants pop up everywhere here, and now the newly planted cyclamen are flowering too. It's a magical setting. So going further on down the steps, you come to the old farmhouse building. And in Frere's day, the gardeners would have lived there to take care of the plants and the watering. Small animals lived there too, such as goats and ducks and chickens. The stone roof was broken and very dangerous and overgrown. And the doors were rotten and the rooms below full of rubble. It was going to be a lot of hard work to make this building safe again. Amazingly, it has happened. And the doors are restored and painted, and the rooms below are usable, although not open to the public yet. There are plans for this, but it's still early days. This building was badly damaged from years of neglect, and the roof timbers had to be secured. And the result's really good now, thanks to the endless works of George Mifsud. He's renovated the window shutters, painted doors, and the broken roof structure. It looks really perilous, but George has a way of making it work. And this is what we see today, a secure building with a watertight roof and new planting instead of rubble and danger. The terrace has been cleared. Sitting on the bench, you can enjoy the lovely hibiscus plants in the pots. I think they're hibiscus, probably are. You can just see a doorway in the wall in front of the farmhouse, and now this has been cleared and is one of the ways that lead into the next garden area. This is our most recent photo from Malta to show you. It's really beautiful now. So the next area to the farmhouse is this secret and very central garden called the Garden of Birds, for various reasons, but namely because the Spiteri family kept a variety of geese and ducks there. Until recently, we did not have access to this area, and all that was possible was this tempting view down into it. All we could see was the old stone bath and masses of plant growth, but we had photographs that showed what it once looked like, so it was very tantalizing. Patience has been rewarded. When the Spiteri family gave permission, the moment had come to enter this little garden. Opening the blocked stone doorway took the careful work of George and the team. And they'd really kindly waited until I came on a visit to Malta in 2019 to do the final knocking through. And then we celebrated in style. You can now walk through this doorway into the Garden of Birds, as originally intended. And this is an old photo from the 1930s. It's very dark, probably on your screen. Shows one of the Price sisters with a friend on the steps, just the other side of that same doorway. And here we can see the balustrades on the stairway being made by George and the team. Each one carefully placed is a standard of workmanship, highly professional and overseen by Edward at every turn. And the stone pond, which was the duck pond, has been returned to its former use. Now cleared and cut back, the flowering climbers are a real show again. The steps you see in the corner with its original iron railings lead up to an entrance to the building next door called Villa Hay. The door itself has been restored just this year and the railings tidied up. George's work, no doubt. This little hidden garden of the birds is a real gem, and it would have been the private garden for Villa Hay. Sorry about the dog.
You're going to have to do the slides. I'm going to get rid of it.
Oh, help!
Bang!
The Villa Hay building is a very old property, even older than Villa Frere. It's in the lower garden, not far from Villa Frere itself. And this photo is from the 1930s when the Price family lived there. The porch and shutters have long since broken, as you can imagine. But luckily we have old photos which help with the restoration plans. Villa Hay, so named by John Frere after his wife's family name. It was often used for the family to sleep in during the hot summer months. There is a story of Lady Errol's mother when staying there, bathing herself in this little pond in the garden of birds during a particularly hot summer. This photograph shows the same building about 3 years ago, very badly dilapidated. When the restoration work was eventually allowed to start, seemed almost beyond repair. The roof timbers had fallen in, and a storm did further damage in 2018. But the basic structure was just about standing. Amazingly, the coat of arms for the Hay family is still intact on the wall of the building over the front doorway, and the detail shows the words "Renovate Animos." How appropriate for a restoration project. Once access was allowed, scaffolding poles were needed to secure what remained of the roof supports after years of decay. Years of rubbish had to be removed. It was hard and dusty work. But much work is going on now, inside and outside, and the whole roof made safe again. Rubble and broken stones were everywhere, even on the stairway after the roof above had fallen in. However, all the helpers are unstoppable in making the restoration we see today. 4 exhausted but happy helpers on the same stairway posing for a photo. Any visitor or volunteer is put to work. And eventually it all began to look tidy again, and the front doorway with a coat of arms is visible over the door. The most recent work has been on the lower boundary wall adjacent to the modern block of flats. The occupants of the flats support the garden project, as it's obviously to their advantage to look out on a green space, and some of the flat owners are volunteer workers as well. On this lower level is a newly planted orchard, which is as far as the project can go for the moment, until the last part of the garden is accessible, when the villa itself may become available. The Spiteri family still hold the lease, and when the business occupying the villa is relocated, then further access may be possible. And here are many of the various helpers in the Garden of Birds. They're so keen and dedicated to do what they can to help the project under Edward, Fernando and George's professional eyes. It's like being a member of the Villa Frere family, as they make everyone feel so welcome. The dream of rejoining the classical temple at the top of the garden with the rest of the grounds is an obvious next step. May yet happen. but at present it's the car park. Much negotiation will be needed to take place for this next move. But every year brings new surprises and achievements. All are invited to visit, COVID permitting, at their monthly garden open days, now held on the first Sunday of each month. With all the travel bans in place, we all wish we could go travelling, so we'll leave you with a few pictures of the gardens as they are today. This one looking up the garden from the roof of the farmhouse. The gazebo is visible and the new window of the visitor centre at the top. It's a beautiful place to see and enjoy. And with Fernando's eye for gardening, he's planted most of the flowers himself and created a vista at every turn in the garden. Here, you can see the dragon's blood tree showing above the flowers. It was planted in memory of Martin Spiteri, who cared so much for the lower garden and sadly died a few years ago. In this way, new memories are being created for today's people and adding to the Frere and Price histories. And if you're interested in any more detail, you can buy my book, which supports the project. If you give your names to the Friends of Valletta, they will arrange for me to send you a copy. It's £15, including postage, and the funds raised from its sale go to the restoration project. So thank you for asking us to share Villa Frere with you. Hope you've enjoyed hearing a bit of our history. And if you've any questions, we'll try and answer them.
Thank you very much. That's very good. Thank you very much indeed, Joe and Sandy. David, can you take over the questions for
Graham, we also have Fernando Mifsud in the audience today. So can I ask maybe Fernando to say a word?
Please do.
Fernando, if you could unmute yourself if possible and show your video.
Start my video.
Please.
Hello.
Hello.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you so much for this, Joe and Sandy. It was lovely watching every bit of it. I feel honored being involved in the Villa Frere project. And, you know, it's been quite a mission for us all there for the past for myself for the past 4.5 years, but it's been going on for the past 7 years when you all came over and started helping Edward with all the restoration at the time. And there was Peter, you remember Peter Borgillo, and you know, all the team so many years ago now. It's all passing so quickly. And you know, now the gardens are looking so colorful and lovely, especially at this time of the year. So you know, it's all great to see so many people this evening attending the talk. I hope all of you are keeping well, and it's great. It's been great watching you all.
Thank you very much, Fernando.
You're very welcome. It's I'm really grateful, you know, for all of this, because at the moment, especially with COVID, it's been very difficult for us to raise funds, and these funds will be used very well in the restoration project and are much needed at the moment.
I think that if there are no more questions, David, I think that I would just like to say on behalf of us all, what a really interesting talk that was. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Sandy. It really was very, very good. And having been there and seen what you've done, it really does bring it home to you. So thank you very much indeed. And I'm sure that everybody will join me in saying thank you to you.
Yeah.